Now today we are trying to get some weather data into our database, so the idea is to use Python to actually scrape the website. Now I'll be showing both the options, in which first we are actually going to scrape the site, and the second one, which we are actually going to use the API of the website to actually gather the weather data and bring that into our database. Now, weather data would really be useful if you're building a time series model. I'll give you a couple of examples where you actually will use the weather data. So an example, if you're trying to forecast the revenue for a specific product, or if you're trying to project what amount of calls will come into the call center. So if you're trying to see the volume of calls, if you're trying to build a time series analysis on that, you would be using weather as one of the feature in your model. So again, it will help in terms of feature engineering, in terms of building those features into your database. So again, this video would be really helpful for yourself if you're working as a data scientist and you're trying to build this information into your database so you can actually use this for your time series modeling. So sit back, relax, and watch this video till the end, because in the end, we'll be covering how to use Airflow to actually automate the whole pipeline. Now again, we'll start using first with Python. If you don't really know much about Python, do watch my other videos on my channel. Subscribe to my channel for my future videos as well, because on my channel we do cover a lot of videos around how to use Python. We cover basics of Python. We also look at how to use SQL and all the other data science languages that are really useful in this field. And in the end, we'll be looking at how to use Airflow. Now, I have made another video on Airflow, which you can actually check up now here. In this video, we went through really basics of Airflow, because today we'll be using as more intermediate level, where we'll build sort of like dependencies on one task to the other task. So we'll be using it more intermediate level than actually starting from the beginner level. So if you do want to check the basics, check this video out and let's start coding. I'll see you at home. Perfect, so I'm back home now. So the first thing first, I just got this parcel, which is from Thomann. So I actually know what exactly is in it, which is my mic that I just ordered. Again, because I do feel sometimes that because I'm using the camera, which is Canon G7X Mark II. I mean, the quality of the image is pretty good, but I do feel like that the audio is not that great on this camera. That's why I do find myself that I'm actually shouting in the camera to actually get my point across, or else the voice is going to be really low. So that's why I ordered this mic. So first thing what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up this mic, and then I'll start recording. Then you can see the difference in my voice. I don't really have to shout in the camera. I can just normally talk. Even if I'm outside, I can maybe have some sort of cover on the mic, and you can use that with this camera, and I hope that actually improves the quality of the voice. I know a couple of times people have mentioned to me that your voice kind of changes on your video, and I'm really sorry about that. I mean, it's just because the quality of the audio is not that great, but I'm doing my best to kind of improve everything on my videos. So I bought this new mic. I'm just going to set it up now, and you can see the difference. If you like my videos, give it a thumbs up and do subscribe to my channel. And I'm working hard to actually improve the quality of my videos and actually create different types of videos and bring more content to you. So without wasting any more time, I'm just going to set up this mic, and then we'll start working on this web scraper, and then we'll move towards working it on an API base. Perfect, so my mic is now all attached, and as you can see the difference in my voice. I hope there is some difference. Obviously I'm going to check that as well afterwards, but I didn't actually explain what mic that I got. So this is the mic that I bought, which is Zoom H1N handy recorder, and I read a lot of good reviews about it, so I thought it would be a good purchase, and definitely would know in a couple of videos anyway. So first thing is that we are going to look at the website that we are trying to scrape. So as you can see, the link is mentioned here. Obviously I'm going to leave the link on the description below as well if you're trying to scrape with me. So this is the website that we are trying to scrape, which is met.no. So the idea behind this is I'm actually going to teach you how to actually look for different classes and how to look at the HTML code, which is in the background of the site first. If you're trying to code along with me, I'll be leaving the description for our GitHub repository on the bottom of this video, and also the link for the site. So you can easily grab the link from there and start coding with me. So as you can see, first of all, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to look at the weather. So as you can see, the weather itself is on a 1 hour window. So it's an hour by hour weather, which is for Dublin. So what I'm trying to do first of all is, as you can see, this is one table, and then I have same table for tomorrow and the day after. So my idea would be to actually scrape this columns and these values which are present in this row. So first of all, I want to kind of see what is behind it. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm actually going to click one of the variables up here and right click, and I'm going to click inspect. Once you do that, it will actually open this window on the right hand side, which is again the window where I can easily hover over, and then once I'm hovering over, you can actually see what exactly I'm referring to. So as you can see, once I go up more along T head, which is the actual head of the table, so as you can see, we want to actually take all this information, plus also if I go more down, which is again, as you can see up around here, if I actually maximize it, so T body is the values which we actually want to take out and put it into our data frame. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm actually going to start basically loading the packages that I want for this. So I'm actually going to go back to my Python code, and I'm actually going to start importing the libraries that I want for this example. So I'm going to say something like from, and it's BS4, which is your beautiful soup, import perfect. I'm actually going to bring all the other libraries as well that I want now. I know I would be using pandas. And because obviously the first example, I would want to actually open the URL as well. So I would need the request module, which is your URL lib.request. So for this, I'm actually going to import that as well, which is import URL lib.request. That should be okay. And then I need the next, which is import OS, and I might actually use datetime as well. So I'm actually going to bring that information now as well. So datetime, import date, and I'm actually going to bring in time delta as well. Yep, that should be okay. And just to set the date as well, today is equal to date dot today. Perfect. So what I'm going to actually do now is I'm actually going to start forming my code in on a class and a function basis, but I'm actually going to run different parts of the code itself manually. And in the end, once I'm happy with the code, I'm actually going to just execute throughout my class. So I'm going to create a class first of all, which is, I can name it maybe weather, data feeds. Perfect. So the first thing that I would need then is actually, maybe let's initialize our function first of all. So def init self, and what I want to do is I want to actually pass on my links that I want to open. So first of all, the links variable. Now usually, yeah, you would be mentioning that as self.links. But I'm just going to run them one by one just to kind of like really explain what exact part of the code is trying to do. So there we have the link that we are trying to open, which is the link that I have just open on the background, which we'll go back to it again once we're looking at the classes that we want to kind of like go through from Beautiful Soup. So perfect. So next thing I'd need is I'm actually going to start creating my function. So which is, I'll just name it as something like get weather data. So within that function, obviously I'm just going to pass on self. As you can see there is, if I go back to my website again, so as you can see, like the data itself, the columns are not really straightforward. It's not really in one row. It's actually, it gets more nested again, because if you see where I see cloud cover, it actually has its own subheadings. So what I want to kind of like do is once I'm actually within that header file, I want to actually extract all of these, and then also want to extract all the subheadings as well, because once I'm extracting all the rows, then I can easily merge them all together. And I'm actually going to start creating my empty list first of all. So I do have one list which is for a header, which is equal to empty list, and then you have for the actual data. Then I'm actually going to create another one for all the headings beforehand to actually include all the subheadings as well. So I'm going to just name it as dh and pass it on as this. So next thing what I want to do is I want to actually get the link from the list that I've created for link in links. So which is on the top. Usually, because obviously if it's in the class, I should mention it as self.links. But what I want to do for the moment is I'm just going to run them separately anyway, so there should not be any problem. So I'm actually going to first of all read out all the actual dependencies that I need for this package. And then I'm actually going to run the links. Once I do that, I'm actually going to create all my empty lists as well. And then secondly, once I loop into my list, what I want to kind of like first of all do is I want to actually start bringing up the information. So I want to open the link, which is URL. I would just name it as URL open, which is equal to, I'm actually going to pass it on as URL lib. I'm going to call that function, which is then dot request module and dot URL open. Once I do that, I'm actually going to pass on my link, and that's what I'm actually going to run first. Perfect. That's, if you see the error here, that error just because obviously I haven't mentioned it as self.links, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to run them separately anyway, so that should not be a problem. As you can see, URL underscore open variable is now created, which is my client HTTP response. So next, what I'm going to do is soup, which is equal to, I'm actually going to read the function from beautiful soup, which is beautiful soup, capital letters, just mind that, URL underscore open. Once I do that, I'm actually going to parse it as HTML parser, HTML parser. So once I do that, so as you can see that then my variable is actually created. So the next thing that I want to do is, actually to create the table, which would be equal to soup.find. And what I'm trying to find now is the table. So obviously if I go back to my link, I'm actually trying to find this table, because if you go back up here on the description, you can see that overall, even if you go more higher, this is actually a table. So you can easily see it from the actual HTML code. That is the table ID, and then you have the class. Obviously I would need this class to copy that. So I'm actually going to just copy this class. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back here, and I have my table open. And then the next thing that I actually need is to give the actual attributes, which is attr s is equal to, and then you have your start of curly braces, class, which is then colon, and then you pass it on your actual class that I'm trying to read. Perfect. And then what I want to do, so once I do that, actually if I run this, just want to make sure I didn't make any mistakes there, and perfect. So I can see that my class is, I can easily read that class. So I've created this variable, which is table. So what I want to kind of do next is actually to find, so I want to, because I have already read that class, what I want to do next is I want to find something within that class. So first of all, what I want to find is all the headers. So if I actually go back within this, so I can easily see that this is what I'm trying to look for, which is my T head. And these are the table headers. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back into my function, and this is table, and I can name it as table header, which is then equal to, and I'm actually going to pass a function which is table.find. And what I'm trying to find is the actual T head. Once I do that, I'm actually going to just run this as well. Perfect. And then once I find the T heads, what I want to do next within that is actually to find all the so within the T head, as you can see, all the variables that are actually within TR, which is, if you see, if I hover over on the TR, if you can see the highlighted, the time, weather, temperature, precipitation, wind, pressure, humidity, dew point is all getting highlighted. So that's the variable I'm actually looking for. So then what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to extract that information. So let's create a variable which could be named as rows is equal to table header dot find underscore all. So I'm going to call that function, and I'm actually going to pass on tr, which is my table rows. So once I run that, And once I run that, as you can see, that's been created. So the results are created in this. So this is so what I want to do then is I want to loop through the variables, and I want to find, because once I go into the rows itself, so as you can see back here within tr, everything is actually getting mentioned within this th, which is the header of the table. So as you can see, even within that th, and as you can see, all of them are here. So you have your time, you have your header. So I want to kind of like extract this information out. So what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to say something like I'm just going to do a for loop, which is for row in rows, which is my variable which I just created. And then th is equal to rows dot find all. Sorry, there should be underscore. And what I'm trying to find is the table header. So once I do that, before running this, what I want to actually do is strip all the white spaces. So for that, I'm actually going to do is th is equal to, I'm going to use list comprehension. So for that case, head.text.strip, and I'm going to call the function, and then for head in dh. Perfect. And then final, what I want to do is I want to append it to header. So header.append, which is the list that I created in the first place. So header.append, and then I'm actually going to head for head in dh if the value is there. So if head. So I'm just going to include all of them and run it. So as you can see, once I do the loop through the whole values, and I've actually first of all trying to find, which is th, and then basically trying to strip the values so there's no white spaces, and then just appending that to header. So once I open that, as you can see, that's a list. And because I have gone through both of them, so basically I have created one list which is of 9 items, and then the other one which is of 5 items, which is the subcolumns. So what I'm going to actually do now is I'm actually going to go out of this for loop. What I want to do is header column, because I want to kind of like create them into one column, don't have them in two separate lists, one for all the 9 items and one for all the 5 items. What I want to actually have it as is like it's one header column that includes all the values that I want to have within one line. So what I'm going to do next is for that is header column is equal to, I'm going to create this as an empty list first, and then what I want to do is header subcolumn, and that's my another empty list, and then finally header columns is equal to, that will be header, and I'm going to subset it, and which is again I'm going to say 0, and then finally I'm actually going to use all the values -1, and what I want to do then is also for the subcolumns header subcolumns. So subcolumns are actually header, and if I say something like 1, that should be all the second list, because again in Python index starts from 0, so 1 refers to the second list. So in that case, once I run these two, now just to make it easier, what I want to actually also do is give it a gap. So as you can see, after I ran the for loop, this is all happening outside the for loop, not inside the for loop. And then what I want to do is header columns. So what I want to actually do is, because I have them two in different variables, so what I want to do is I want to actually concatenate them together and make it one row. So I can actually use function like extend here. So I'm actually going to say .extend, and the values I'm going to pass it on within this is, because I've already selected header column, so that's my first column, and I want to extend it. And how do I want to extend it? I actually want to pass on the header subcolumns. So once I run all of this, if I show you an example of header columns, so I'm going to go back and I'm actually going to look at header columns, and as you can see, it's all the columns that I want to be visible into this, because again I have selected all of the columns -1. So obviously I'm not selected in the first list if I actually open both of them together. So I'm actually going to go back and open header. So as you can see, I had two lists to start with, and within that, obviously I didn't want the figure which is the cloud cover, because instead of cloud cover, as I go back into this, the cloud cover was the top heading, and within that top heading I had these 5 subheadings. So I didn't really want to see the top heading, I wanted to see the 5 subheadings. So what I did then was I actually created them into 2 separate lists, and I basically extended them onto one on the other one. So for this, obviously I said -1, which means obviously I don't want to include the last value, which was in this case was the cloud cover. And I created one list, and then I basically created the second list, which was all the sub items, which I referred to header 1. And once I used them to on a separate list, what I did in the end was I extended my main list with the subcolumn list. So I hope that is clear, and then I'm actually going to move on now. So the next thing, so once I have actually extracted all the column information, I actually want to go back to my table itself. And what I want to now exactly take out of these tables is these rows. So what I want to do is actually to show it. And as you can see, T head was the actual header. And if I go down to the T body, that's the actual, the data that is there into that table, which I want to extract out now. So for this, what I want to actually do next is I'm actually going to create, so obviously I have to loop through a couple of times on this data to actually extract it out. So for this, I'm actually going to leave this comment out first. So what I want to do is whether data rows. So within this, what I want to kind of like take out first, say for an example, would be table. So I'm going to create this variable again, which is table body, which is equal to table.find. The same if we did that for T head as well. They are going to do the same thing with T body, which is perfect. So once I have created this variable, before running that, I mean like it's quite similar task that we did before. I can actually copy paste this loop as well, to be honest. I'm actually going to, or maybe if you could actually create it again, but I'm actually just going to take this value, which is the next one, which is rows, table head. So in this case, it's actually table body. So within this, as you can see, what I've done now is I've created the variable rows and table body.find all. I'm trying to find all the tr, which is my table rows. And within that, if I actually go back into my data set itself to look again, and as you can see within these table rows, these are the actual data which I've collected in my variable rows. But if I actually extract them more, I can see there are 2 different types of information that I want to extract, which is first is TH, which is the table headers, which again, I do want to extract them because they're the time of the weather. And then I can see the other one, which is the TD, which is referred to as a cell. And within that cell, I do have, again, yeah, these are all the TDs, which has all the actual values that I want to extract to create my data frame. So what I'm going to do now is to extract this. I'm actually going to create 2 for loops to extract both of them. For this, I'm actually going to do something like for row in rows. And what I want to do next is, because these are my columns, which is again the row. So I'm going to use the same similar way of we used it before, so which is row dot find all. And then I'm actually trying to find, first of all, is my TD. And what I want to do then is calls, which is equal to, I'm actually going to use list comprehension and element, so I can just leave it as a short form, dot text dot strip, because I want to again make sure there's no white spaces in this, for LE in calls. And finally, next what I'm actually going to do is whether data, which was my initial list that I created. I want to append the values within that, so I'm going to do append. Again, element, which again I can reference LE for LE in calls if LE. So again, this is just basically trying to check if the values are actually there. Then I actually basically append those values within my list that I've created in the start, as mentioned here. So once I do that, so what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to run the code that I just created. Once I run this, as you can see, if you go into the variable itself, which is weather underscore data, and if I go back to the first of all to the site again, so you can see once I refresh the page, I do have two of the rows which is now available, because obviously I was working on this code. So once I look at these two values, so these are the 2 hours worth of data that I actually want to extract into my list, which is the weather underscore data list, which I just appended on the last line. So once I go back to my list, as you can see, the values are now updated into my list, which is weather underscore data. So what I want to do next is, because as you can see, if I go back into this, these are only values starting from here till the end. Because if you actually see on the row level, if I actually go back into where we were looking at before, so within my T-body, and if I go back in under the rows, so if you see like all the data that we have just extracted is from these table cells, which is again the actual data. But what I also want to do is I also want to extract this TH, because that's the actual time that I want to actually have it within my data set as well. So what I'm going to do for that is it's going to be exact same loop again. So for this, what we're going to do is for row in rows, actually I'm going to say th is equal to row dot find all, that's th. So once I run this one, and then within that, what I want to also run is I'm going to do the exact same steps again, which is again stripping the values and also appending it back onto the list. But first it's going to be saved on th as well, which is th is equal to, and that's going to be a list comprehension timestamp. Let's name it that, .text, .strip, call it. And then what I'm going to do next is for timestamp in the actual th. So once I do this, what I'm going to do next is weather underscore data underscore th. So next what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to append these values, which is weather underscore data underscore th. As you can see, I've already created the empty list here. So what I want to do next is I'm actually going to do dot append, and within that I'm actually going to say timestamp for timestamp in th if timestamp, just to make sure that there is some value in this. And what I want to do next is, as you can see, I did make some typos here. Okay, I did make one typo on the actual list as well when I create it. So I'm just going to rename that and just going to create that list again. And I'm actually going to run this part of the code. Once I do that, because I'm again importing the same information onto weather data th, if I actually go back to the exact variable and if I look into that, as you can see, two of my times are also extracted, which is my 10 and 11. These are the 2 hours that I'm actually extracting the data for. So these are the total. So these are the data actually I'm extracting for. These are the headings, which are my time headings. Now again, if I go back, I do have header columns where all my headers are. Then if I go back into the weather data where the actual data is, and weather data th, that's the actual time for that weather data. So I do have these 3 lists that I just initialized in the start, and then I'll have to actually update the data into that as well. So what I want to do, final step would be to actually create the data frame and bring it all together. So what I'm going to do for that now would be to actually create the data frame, which is Dublin. And for that, what I'm actually going to do is equal to pd.dataframe. And within that, what I want to actually do is weather underscore data. And I want to actually bring every information that I have. So once I run this, as you can see, the Dublin is created here. If I actually open this, you can see that the list actually is formed into a data frame format. Obviously, I don't really have any index and I don't have any columns, which is mentioned for these. So let's bring them as well together. So what I'm actually going to do next is, so let's actually bring the index first, Dublin index. Say for an example, I'm actually going to put them into a separate data frame itself. So pd.dataframe. That's That's the TH, because these are the times. I'm going to bring all the information that I have. And then finally, what I want to do then is, so what I'm going to do then is I'm actually going to concatenate those two together. So it's Dublin, say for an example, I can actually say something like Dublin weather data maybe. Yep, that should do, and is equal to pd.concat. And then what I want to do, actually concatenate as, so I'm actually going to bring those two together. For this, I'm actually going to say something like, so first of all, I'm actually going to pass the index, and I'm actually going to pass the actual values from the other data frame. So for my index, which is my Dublin underscore index, that's correct. And then I'm actually going to pass the next one, which is Dublin. So once I do that, I'm actually going to also say axis is equal to 1. And once I'm actually going to, I have already ran the data frame 1. So I'm actually going to create those two now. So once I run that, I'm actually going to go back to Dublin weather data. If I open this, as you can see, obviously at the moment I've only concatenated them together. I haven't turned them into an index. I can actually move this column here and make it as the index value. So you can see at least my time and my data is actually together now, so which is good. I'm actually going to add the columns now to this. So what I want to do in this case is Dublin weather data dot columns. Perfect. And then what I want to do is equal to header, because that's where I have my columns. And what I want to do is include all of them. So let's bring them all together. And if I run this and actually go back to my Dublin weather data, if I open this, as you can see, my column names are now changed, which is time, weather, temperature, and as you can see, all the values are there within for each equivalent. And as you can see, there's no mistakes or anything like that. So that looks all perfect to me. So what I want to maybe actually do now is to, rather than just having times, maybe I will create a new column which will have date and time together. So for this, what I want to do is then I can easily include them. That should be no problem. So I'm actually going to create a new variable within this data frame, Dublin underscore weather data. And then I'm actually going to create a new column called date. That should do equal to, and then I'm actually going to say I'm actually going to use my library date.today. Perfect. Now, because if I actually, what I have to also do is if I actually go back to my data itself, I don't think so. The type of that is actually a time format. It's actually a character format. So I do have to change that as well to concatenate it together. So for this, what I'm actually going to do is Dublin weather data, and then the variable would be time, which is then equal to, then I'm actually going to convert that into, because again this is a character field, so I have to convert that into date time field. So I can just call that function, which is pd dot to date time. That's correct. And then what I want to do within that would be actually pass on that column, which is Dublin data. Oh, sorry, Dublin weather data. And within that, what I'm actually going to do then is pass the variable itself. Format is equal to, and that should be my hour. And then actually also want to pass on the minute dot dt dot time. And if I run this, just to make sure, I'm just going to add this as well. I don't think so, I haven't ran it yet. Perfect. So I do have my two columns now within that. If I actually go back to Dublin weather data, and as you can see, my time column is now actually converted into a time variable rather than a character variable. And then I do have my date column as well. So what I want to do then is bring them together. So to connect them together, what I have to do then is to actually convert them back into string, concatenate them together, and then actually convert them back into the date time. So that should be pretty straightforward. So what I'm actually going to do then is Dublin weather data, and I'm actually going to create a new column, date time. That should do, and then is equal to PD. I'm actually going to put that in the end maybe. What I want to do then is Dublin weather data, and the variable I'm after is the date first. And what I want to do then is to actually maybe have to convert that first to apply. I'm actually going to convert them into a string first. And then what I'm actually going to do then is I'm actually going to add a bit of a gap in middle. So I'm actually going to add the spacing, and then I'm actually going to do is add the time variable. So for this Dublin weather data, and then the time column. Oops, as you can see now, yeah, perfect. So and I have to apply that into a string as well. So str, that should convert the column into string. And then finally, what I'm also going to do is I'm actually going to put all of this p.to date time. Perfect. So don't seem to be any error in this. Once I run this, as you can see, if I go back into my data set, so I have a new column now created, which is date and time, which actually has these two values. Now, what I can also do is I can actually create, I can only select the values that I want, and I can reorder them. So just to select all the columns that I actually wanted. So what I want to do now is to actually just select the values. So for this, I'm actually going to do something like Dublin weather. So I'm actually creating a new variable, and is equal to, you can easily select the columns that you want. So Dublin underscore weather underscore data. And just to make it quicker, I've copied all the values that I want, which is on my column. So if I actually just run this, that should be, if I actually just run this, that should just create my, so that if I run this, that should just create my data frame, which is the actual Dublin weather. And as you can see, date, time, and all the values that I need for each column. So if I run this, that should give me all the results. So I hope you enjoyed this part of the video where actually we scraped the website, and it gave you some sort of understanding of how to actually approach this problem if you're trying to build your own web scraper. So the next thing what I want to do is to actually use it through an API. Again, Met.no does have one API as well, which I can actually use to make my code run more faster. And again, because it usually is more better if you have an API for the site, because again, if some people don't really know what an API is, so API is an application programming interface, which means then you can use some programming language to actually access the data, because again, they would have created in a format that you can easily grab the information. And a lot of the times when you have an API, you would have an equivalent programming language library for that API. You can easily use that library to extract your information and convert that into a data frame. So let's give you a quick example of that as well. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to create a new file. So obviously I have installed all the dependencies before the session. So for this, I'm actually going to start just loading those dependencies in this. So for this, I'm actually going to say from met no underscore, and that's location. And if I get the file name right, forecast, that's correct. Import place. So these are the two modules within that, and the other one is forecast. So that's the actual library that we have for Python. What I want to do then is import pandas, as I know I will be using that as PD. And then finally, I'm actually going to also import JSON, because I know the data type is in a JSON format. So we have to actually use that as well. So what I'm actually going to do first is create my class, which is class as we did before, which is weather data feeds. Within that class, obviously I've created the first function, which is my initialization function in it, underscore self. And then what I want to do then is, because for this I do have to create the user agent. Again, you can go in more detail on the API itself. I'm just trying to show to you how to run it. You would find a lot of documentation for your own API which you're using, but it's just to kind of like show you an example of when you're scraping the site or when you're actually using the API interface. So for this, first I have to kind of like initialize my user agent, which I'll do within my initialization function, and I will just say is equal to pass on the location of that file underscore location forecast. The version is 1.0. That is perfect. Next, what I want to actually do then is create my function itself, which is, again, I'm actually going to create it as same way, whether data self. And as I know, within this function, I do have to pass some parameters. So I'm actually going to create parameters now, and actually will pass the default values for them as well. So I know there you would be needing something like county, which in this case I'm actually going to say is equal to Dublin. And then I'm actually going to pass the rest of the variables as well, which is my default values. And then the first one would be obviously the latitude. Which I've already got it for the location I'm actually looking at for, which is 53.33, and that which is my default values for an example. And the longitude is equal to, if I get the actual values, which is 6.24. And once I get that, which is negative 6.24 actually. Perfect. And then also you would have to decide your altitude. So my altitude is equal to 10. Perfect. So I have my parameters, and then what I want to do first of all is something like Dublin is equal to place. And that's, I'm just using the documentation of the library itself. So what I want to do then is county latitude, longitude, which is my variables that I just created, and altitude. That should be perfect. And then I'm actually going to do is something like forecast. Now actually let's create it as, I'm actually going to run it as a class. So I'm actually going to initialize them with self as well. So self dot, and this should be self dot as well. Forecast is my self dot forecast. I'm actually going to create a lowercase, so don't confuse the name with the actual function call name. So forecast is equal to the actual function call is forecast as well, which is then my self. Going to pass the values, which is Dublin first of all, which is my place, because again within the place I do have county, latitude, longitude, and the altitude, and then self.Dublin, and also have to pass my agent. So self.user agent that I created in my initialization function, and within that what I want to do next is pass the value which is for complete, so actually it extracts all the information there within the API for exactly for each of the weather sites. So what I want to do then is I have to call this self.forecast underscore, no, that's actually the function call, which is update, which will actually update the weather data. So once I have done that, what I want to do then is I'm actually going to create a blank data frame, which is equal to p dot data frame. And within that, I'm actually going to do is I'm going to start my for loop for interval. That's correct. For interval in self dot forecast data intervals, and within that what I want to do is row say for an example, say maybe I'll use kind of like similar looking variable. So row is equal to pd dot data frame. So before kind of like moving forward, what I want to actually do is I want to run this to actually show you the values that is actually there within once you make the call to the APIs. So actually to show you what exact data comes back from the API and how I'm actually amending it and creating that into a data frame. So first of all, I'm actually going to just call all the packages that I'm using. I'm going to set this user agent, and within this I'll have to run these values. Also I have my county variable created, and then I have my latitude, longitude, and then finally altitude. Once I have these, then I'm actually going to run Dublin, which is place, and then I'm actually going to run the place function, which if I go back into Variable Explorer, open this, it's a data underscore containers.place, which has my coordinates and the name of the county. Next, what I want to run is my forecast function. So for this, once I'm actually going to run this, as you can see, you have your forecast in this, and it's obviously the data. So the data actually sits under. So if you look in more closely, before actually looking into that, I'm actually going to run to update the actual data as well. So once I call that, you can easily see the call here, which says data is modified. So once I actually open this forecast variable, as you can see, this is the actual data that is in there. So within that, if I actually need to look at the physical data, what I can do is click on this data, and then you have intervals, which is obviously for every hour that the interval is. And within that interval, I can actually double click on that, and you would have these data containers open for each interval. If I open one, just to kind of show you what exact data is in this. So you have your start time and end time, which is again when the actual data, where is the actual data for? So what is the start time for that? What is the end time for that? And then you have your symbol code, and then you have your variables. If I click on variables, you would have another data container open in that, where you have these key values, which is again different variables that you could use for your, if you're using, for say for an example, if you're using this data for forecasting, you can use these different features as you can train your model against those features, so to see if there's any correlation between them. So when we started actually creating this for loop, you can see we are going under forecast.data.intervals, which is obviously I'm trying to go under that data, which is then I find this dictionary, which is my, if I close this out, which is the actual dictionary, which is interval.variables and .orient is index. And this will actually create my dictionary into a data frame format. So once I do that, I'm actually creating two more variables. So one, as I have seen within this, so if I actually open this again, just to show you quickly, within that data, you have intervals. Within the intervals, if I open one of those intervals, you can see that. So within those intervals, you do have this start time, which I actually want to actually extract that information, and the end time. So what I'm actually going to do then is interval, and then finally I'm actually going to call this, and which is equal to interval dot start time. And then the same way I can actually copy this, and I'm actually going to create this as end time. Finally, I do the end time, then actually I can go into more details, which means, so finally I have the end times. What I want to then do is I want to create a data frame, which I just created upon here, the empty data frame. I want to append these values on that data frame, so I can easily say something like df.append, which is appending to the data frame itself, and then I can pass on that row. So once I do that, that should actually create my data frame with the values. So what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to run this. Oh, before running this, I'm actually going to remove this self, because I don't want to run it within the function yet. I'm just running it as a separate, just to run it on the outside of this class itself or the function itself. I just want to show you the result, what it looks like. And then, oops, I can see that there's a mistake here. Just change that into comma. So I'm actually going to, that should do. And then if I run this, as you can see, I have a variable created here. So where you can see easily that the values are in there, which is the start time and the end time, which I executed. And then you have the actual values. Now I do have to do a couple of changes here, because as you can see, obviously the column name is there, which is an easy fix, but I do have these values which are combined together. Whereas what I want to do is I want to take just the values within this column, and these, the values which is on the left hand side, I want to use that and make them as my columns on the top, and the time should be the index. So let's try to reformat our data frame and see how does that look like. So within this, what I'm actually going to do now is I'm actually going to come out of my for loop, and within this, what I'm going to do is df.columns. First of all, let's get the column names clear. And within the columns, which is equal to, so the first column is the actual weather data. Then you have the next two columns, which is, I'm actually going to leave the names the same. So within that, I have my start time, and in the same way I have this, which is my end time. So what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to show you the data frame again. So within this column, I'm going to convert this column into a string column. So next, I'm actually going to convert this into a weather variable. So for this, what I'm actually going to do is df, and then my column name would be something like weather feeds, and I'm actually going to pass on that value. So df, the column name at the moment is weather underscore data, and what I'm actually going to do is dot apply and str, convert that into strings. Hey guys, welcome back. So that day my camera ended up dying, so I'm recording the rest of the session today. So what I'm going to do is I did do more work on the code itself. So I'm going to run, I'm going to pick up from the same point, and I'm actually going to start editing from that point. Now I have wrote more code on it, so I'm just going to be running that code and explaining it to you line by line. So I'm just going to pick up from the same point where we left last time. So first of all, I'm actually going to show you the data frame itself. So this is where we left, where we had the start time, end time, and then we had the weather feeds. So what I want to do next is I want to extract the data from this column. And basically what I want to do is the columns which are on the left hand side, as you can see, the air temperature, cloud area fraction. What I want to do with these headings is to make it as a column in its own. So take the data out, bring these headings and make it as a column headings, and then basically put the data against that, so actually in a pivot format. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show it to you now what I mean by that. So let's run these lines one by one. So obviously, first of all, I'm just naming them as my column names. Once I do that, what I want to do next is I want to actually convert that into a string column. So I'm just going to convert the weather feeds into a string column, and then finally what I'm doing is I'm actually splitting that column into two entries, and the point I'm actually splitting that is, which will be on the space, wherever the space is, it will be actually putting them into two columns, where one would be called as header, the other one is called as value. So I'm actually going to do that first. So once I run this, I'm actually going to go back to my data frame to show you what actually happens. So as you can see here, now I have two more columns, and one column in here is the actual header, which again, as you can see here, which is the value. I'm actually showing it to you here from this point. And then the other one is the actual data, which is column is ref as value here. So I've easily kind of like split them into two columns, which I can use then one as the data and one as the column. So the next thing I want to do is I'm actually going to basically take out, obviously replacing any of the colon sign that was left in the header column. Secondly, what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to turn my data frame into a pivot format, where all these columns which are in the header, I'm actually going to make them as column headings, and I'm actually going to present the data against it. Once I run this, so you can see my column is now in a pivot format, where I have 87 rows and 15 columns now. So as you can see, once I actually open my data frame, so if I actually break it down for you one by one, so as you can see, what happened was the start time became the index. So if I show you here, so it's df pivot, which index is equal to start time, columns is equal to header, and the values is equal to value. So which makes it really easier to actually change the form of the data. So if you see in this way, I have my start time, then I have my column names on the top as the headings of the column, and then the value, which is again value coming from df1. So if I open the other data frame as well at the same time, so this is my first data frame that I was actually trying to convert, and if I bring my df2 back, so as you can see these two side by side, so what happened was the start time actually became the start time, which was the index in this data frame, and then I have my header values, which actually became the columns, and actually have my value column, which is again the actual data set. I have actually basically put that data set against these values, which is my column headers. Now I did some more work on the code, which was more like an housekeeping work, but I do want to break down for you to actually make it easier when you're looking at the code, you understand exactly what function is trying to do what. So again, I'll be leaving this code in my GitHub repository, and I'll be leaving the link on the description below, so you can actually get it from there and you can actually code along with me, or you can understand what exactly is happening. So basically what I want to kind of show is in this, I created first of all another function which was save vector data, which again was just to kind of like give the file name, what file name I want to save it as in my current location. And then also what I was trying to do was to create the date time column. So what I'm doing then is I'm actually giving the path where I want to save this file, and then I'm just uploading that file there. So as you can see, first of all, you might want to just run the first line, which again, what it does is it actually saves the file for the first time, because going forward, then I'll be just appending my next file onto the previous file. So say for an example, if I'm running this code every 6 hours, I want to just basically append my new data that comes out on the same file, so I can have all of that in one file. Secondly, then I created another function, and this function was created just to basically dedupe my database. So why I'm doing this, because say for an example, if I'm running this code every 6 hours, so if I look at the API itself, what basically I get from the API is when I make a call to the API, I get the data which is for the next 48 hours. So every time I'm running after every 6 hours, I would have, say for an example, if I'm running it now and I'm going to run it again after 6 hours, so I'll be having the next 48 hours. So there will be a lot of the times where the date time is exact same for both the values. When I run this for after next 6 hours, I will have more up-to-date data for that values. So what I wanted to do was I want to kind of like dedupe this data and basically take the value which is the last value. So what I wanted to do was I'm actually going to show you by the code. So first of all, I'm actually looking at where the file is being saved. So as you can see, my source folder, which if I go back up, that's the source folder I basically initialized in my initialization call. As you can see, this is the location where I'm saving the file. And I have also given a list, which is my check extension, which is .csv. Why I'm doing this? Because within this call, what I wanted to do was, first of all, I wanted to find the file name. So say for example, if I'm not running this for only one site, I'm actually running this for multiple sites. As I have shown in this example, when I'm making the main call, I'm actually running it for Dublin and Cork. So what I wanted to do was I don't want to clean the file one by one. I wanted to just make one call which actually cleans all the file at the same time. So what this function then does is it looks for all the file names within my source folder, and if anytime the extension, which again I have mentioned here, .csv, is that extension that I'm looking for, which means if it's a CSV file, what I want to do then is to actually first of all print the file name with what file name that is, and then secondly what I want to do is read that CSV. And so I'm in this line, I'm actually just reading that CSV. Then what I'm actually doing is creating it as my data frame. And within that data frame, what I want to do was sort the values by date and time. So with this way, I would have all my values sorted in ascending order of date and time. And I will be taking, so say for an example, if I have run this code now and I'll be running this code again after 6 hours. So basically I will have 2 entries for the same date time. And what I want to do was once I sort them, it will be in ascending order, and I want to take the last value. So as you can see within this line, what I'm doing is I'm dropping all the duplicates, which again on the basis of subset is the date time, and I'm keeping the last value, which means I'll have the most up-to-date recent value within this column, so which will be the value which I'll run in the next task. So say for an example, if I'm running it for next 48 hours, that will be the value which is again on the last value on my data frame. So once I do that, I basically load that file back onto the same download path that I basically defined up here, which was my source folder, plus actually I'm joining the path, which is my actual file name. And then finally, I'm just doing my main call in the function. And within the main call, as you can see, I'm calling that function twice, one for Dublin and one for Cork, where I have different latitude and longitude values. So rather than running this code line by line, I'm actually going to execute the whole code at the same time, just to kind of show you how it actually works, because the video has already gone too long and I want to kind of focus a bit more on the airflow, how to build a pipeline. So I'm actually going to just execute this and show you the actual results that come out of this. So once I select the overall thing and I run this, as you can see, it basically takes my first file, which is the Dublin file, and then it actually updates the values as well. So if I'm actually going to run this again, it will just basically append on the next value on that and then clean that file. So obviously I've run this code before, so next time what happened was it basically loaded the same file and it cleaned it up for me. Same way I did that for Cork file as well. So if I actually show you the values one time, which is again, I have saved one of the values, which is here. So if I open this, as you can see, it is my data frame, which again, I have exact same way. I have the start time and I have all these values and the actual values against those columns. So once we're done with this, the next step is to actually run the Airflow task to do all this automatically. So what I'm actually going to do next is to show you how to run this through Airflow. So what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to start writing the code for Airflow. And once I'm finished with the code, I'm actually going to explain it to you line by line so you understand what exactly is happening within that code. So there's a couple of things that we need to do. First of all, now, if you don't really know how Airflow works, I have another video, which I also leave the link in the description below and in the start of the video. So you can actually use this to get some more basics around how to use Airflow and how to build some sort of pipeline in there. And in this video, what I'm actually wanted to do was to actually just break it down for you how Airflow task is running and what exactly I did to basically execute it through my Airflow. So what I did next was to create 2 of the bash scripts. Again, within these bash scripts, what I'm trying to do is I'm actually just executing the code, nothing else. So if you don't really know much about bash, you don't really have to, because again, these are really simple commands which you can actually copy paste, but I'll explain it to you what exactly is happening within this. So within this project, what we did was we created 2 different types of scripts, one in which we actually scraped the website, the second one in which we actually use the API. So as you can see, these 2 scripts, what I'm actually doing is it's just more for logging the information that my scripts are running perfectly. So as you can see, first of all, I'm basically giving my directory where the location is. Then I'm actually creating these log file. Now these are just empty.log files, which is again where I'm saving my data, which is the data I'm saving is the timestamp when the actual code is running, when the actual bash script is running. And what I'm also recording is, so when the Python service is executed, I'm giving some space, and then I'm actually running the Python code itself. So as you can see, I'm basically giving the link for where my Python is installed, and then -m because I'm running it as a project folder, and then src where my script is saved. So if I actually go back and actually try to show you the location, so this is what the structure of my file looks like. So as you can see, I do have 3 of the folders. Now src, which is my script where the actual scripts are sitting, which is both these, which is my API script, and ws, which is web scraping. And as you can see, all these data is where the data is actually getting stored as well, which is in the CSV format. Secondly, I have created these 2 empty files, which I'll show you how I'm using this. First of all, which is .log file. And then I've created these 2 script files, which is again just where I'm executing, which I'm actually showing it to you on this background, which is in the bin folder. So what I'm doing within this is I'm actually updating my log information in that .log file, and then I'm basically running this code, which is my weather feeds API. Once I run this, once the execution is finished, then I'm also logging the information when the actual code running is finished. Similarly, it's the same code actually happens within the Python run script 2.sh as well, and which exact same code. The next what I want to do is, because again, I won't be executing these files manually, I want to give access to Airflow to execute it automatically. So I have to change the mode of the files. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to my terminal, and if I show it to you, I'm actually going to see something like change mode +x, and I'm actually going to describe the file name, which is runscript1.sh. And then similarly, I'm actually going to run the same command for second one as well. So as you can see, once I do this, my files actually turn into a green color, which you can see here. So for an example, if I'm just creating an empty file and say something like nanorun.sh, and say for an example, if I'm saying hello and save this and do ls, as you can see, like at the moment, this run.sh is actually saved as in a black color. But once I do something like change mode, which I did for the rest of the file, which is change mode +x, and I'm actually going to say something like run.sh and do ls, as you can see, that turns to green color as well, which means now you have given the access to run it from anywhere to all the users on this machine. So same way, Airflow would be able to now pick this file and run it in the bash operator. So next, what I'm actually going to do is start creating the operator itself, where I'm actually going to write the code for Airflow, and then I'll actually explain to you line by line what exactly is happening within that code. Perfect. So now the code is finished. So let's break down what exactly is happening within this code. So as you can see, it's import date time. I'm actually importing the date time variable. Then I'm actually importing the airflow, import DAG. Now DAG is your directed acyclic graph, and then I'm also loading all the packages that I need to actually create bash operator and Python operator. Again, within Python operator, what I'm actually doing is I'm creating this notify.txt file, but I want to update with the timeframes when the actual script runs. Now, again, within this project, the actual code runs a lot faster. But again, if you're running some project which takes some time, it would be good to actually log all this information into some file where you actually can check when, say for an example, if you are running your code overnight, you can actually come back and check the following day if the code ran properly or not. And you can actually use these log files to do that work. So within this, what I'm actually trying to do is, first of all, I'm just opening the file and I'm actually writing the date and time within that file to basically say when the actual script was basically finished. So, and this, again, you have one function call, which is notify script 1 and notify script 2, which again does the same work, but I'm actually creating both of them because I want to call different print functions. So once I do that, then I'm actually giving my default arguments where again, owner is airflow, and then which is again the user of my airflow. Now, if you don't really know much about how to obviously use again the airflow, you can actually check the documentation on airflow, how to install airflow, because again, these are the more basic commands, which I'm assuming you know. So I'm actually going to move ahead where I'm actually going to give the start time when the actual code has been created, and then the concurrency, which is 1, and retries is 0. So what I want to do next is I created the DAG itself, which I gave my name of my DAG file. Then finally, I gave my default arguments, which you assign, which you have just created up here. Secondly, what I wanted to do was what is the interval I want to run this. Currently, I've mentioned it as hourly basis. I can also change it to daily or 6 hours. If you're used to using cron jobs, you can actually use cron job time variances and you can actually put them here and they will work exact same way as well. Then once I do that, as you can see, I have created these call functions here, which is again my OPR script 1, which is my bash operator. Now, if you look at closely, what I'm doing is I'm just giving the task ID first of all. Secondly, what I'm doing is I'm running that script 1.sh, which we just created. Similarly, then second, what I do is notify that Python operator 1, which is my print command, which again updates the file, which says basically this code has completed. So obviously once I run this, I want to run this. Secondly, then I'm actually executing the run script 2. And then finally, what I want to do next is, which is to run the file on Python operator. Now, how to create dependency, what I want to do for that is I want to run OPR script 1. Once OPR script 1 is finished, that's a dependency then. Once this is finished, then only we run the notify 1, which means then we'll update the actual code. Then finally, we go to the next one where we run the second script, and then we create a dependency on that, and then finally we create the last one, which is again printing that information into the log file again. So this way I've kind of like finished up writing the code where I want to run my operators one by one, because in this case I'm using sequential executor, so which I'm actually executing them one by one. You could actually end up using something else where you maybe are using something like Celery or different way you can actually run multiple Airflow operators at the same time. As I know this video has gone too long, what I want to actually show is the execution of this. So for this, what I want to do is I'm actually going to run my Airflow web server. So I'm actually going to go back and on the description below in my GitHub repository, so you can actually extract it from there and use it as your base code. And obviously you can amend it based on your requirement. So as you can see within this, what I want to do was, again, I don't have the DAG file here because you have to update these DAG files into the location itself. So if you see my location, which is pwd, which is a working directory of my Airflow home, where I also have my other DAGs, which I've created here. As you can see, I'm also saving this weather feeds DAG here. Once I save this file here, secondly, what I want to do next is to actually run this. So what I want to show next is to actually show the execution of this project. So for this, I'm actually going to open my terminal because I want to launch Airflow web server. So before actually launching my Airflow web server, because I've just created my DAG in my Airflow home, as you can see here, which is pwd is my working directory for my Airflow home. And then I have my DAGs, which is my folder for directed acyclic graphs. And I've updated my new S1, which is a weather feeds DAG. Now, what I want to do first of all is I want to actually load this into the Airflow. So for this, I'm actually going to do is Airflow init db. So based on this, it will actually load all my DAGs from the SQLite database. So once I do that, then secondly, what I want to do is I'm actually going to make the call on the server. So Airflow web server on the port 8080. So once I do this, as you can see now, my Airflow is running on the background. I'm actually going to open another terminal window because I do have to execute Airflow Scheduler. So once I execute that, as you can see in both the windows, my Airflow is running and then the Airflow Scheduler is running as well. Now, if you don't really want to have your terminal window occupied with this, you can actually pass an argument -t, which again will run on the background. So you don't really have to open the terminal, it will be just running on the background. Once I do this, what I want to do secondly is actually to go into the actual Airflow web server to actually show you on the localhost port 8080 what exactly is there. So what I'm actually going to do next is I'm actually going to go to my localhost port 8080 to actually see my DAGs. So as you can see, my DAG is now updated here, which is my metadata feeds DAG. And once I say turn it on, so what will happen is my files will start getting uploaded here. So if I actually go back quickly onto the file itself, so my file was last updated at 7:33. Now at the moment the time is 7:55. So as you can see, it's updating at the moment, where my files are updated at 7:55, which is because my DAGs are currently running on the background. So this way, what will happen now is after every 1 hour, basically the call will be made to the API server, both the ways, because if you have two different scripts running at the same time, one where we are scraping the site, the second way where we are actually calling the API and where we are extracting the data and updating that data into these CSV files. Same way, if you don't really want to update this data on the CSV files, you can maybe create a connection with your database and directly load this data onto those SQL database. Now, if you don't really know much about that, you can actually check out my video on SQL, where I actually went on how to connect your Python and how to use SQL within Python, or how to load that data in your SQL database. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I know I kind of like rushed a couple of things in the end because I wanted to finish this video, as this video was going for too long. So I hope you enjoyed the content. If you do have any questions, leave it in the comment box below. I'll be more than happy to help you out. And also I'll be leaving all of this code which we built starting from script 1 and script 2. Also all the run scripts file that we created, and then the Airflow code that we created to actually execute the DAG, and then finally the execution we have showed on the front end. So I'll be leaving all this documentation on the GitHub repository. Do check it out if you're trying to work on these feeds and trying to basically bring this information in your database. So I hope you enjoyed this video and got some information out of this video and enjoyed the content. If you're enjoying the content that I'm providing, give it a thumbs up to the video, which actually helps me to understand that you do like this kind of content. I'll create more different types of content, and also I'll be working on getting more content out to you guys. So I hope you're enjoying the channel. Do subscribe to my channel as well, because it definitely helps me or motivates me to actually put more content out there. And as always, peace out.